I thought it would be useful at this time of year, as we approach the end of January, to discuss something in video form which is near to my heart, and I think probably near to the hearts of just about everybody who's listening to this, which is probably only a few people, maybe people who know that I love rambling on to video cameras, but which I think might well be useful for spreading further afield. And that is the experiences of nearly a year's worth of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are coming to the point where we're dealing with 12 months of COVID in our lives, dealing with the business of having a virus dominating the way in which we live. And in the process of doing that, I think uh, looking back on what has happened and looking at what future events probably hold could be worthwhile examining. I'm going to do this from a very personal point of view because I think it would be pointless me going through the process of generalization here and making sweeping statements about the world at large. So I'll talk about myself and I'll talk somewhat about the experiences of my wife, Roxanne, in the United States. I hope she doesn't mind. I don't think she will, because our experiences are very similar. And I don't think there's anything unusual about that. I think it's probably very common to people out in the outside world as well. Uh, One thing that's notable is that Roxanne and I both live alone, or at least I do. Roxanne is part of a shared house where she does have other people around her on occasions. Not all the time, but certainly on occasions. But I live very much on my own in my flat here in darkest Whitley Bay in the northeast of the United Kingdom. So for me, it's been a particularly, what shall I say, interesting is a typical British understatement about how this whole affair of the COVID-19 impact has affected me. And maybe you will see some commonality with yourself in all of this. If you do, well, the one consolation you might get out of this is knowing you're not alone. I hope. When this all started, I was like, I suppose, everyone else. I believed it was going to be all over by Christmas. When have we said that before? The idea that it wouldn't be something permanent, that it would be an ongoing process of, attrition, and eventually we'd overcome the entire issue. And the first experience of lockdown, though it was frightening in its own way, was also to a certain extent expected. It was. We were also there was a certain sense of gung ho togetherness about it all. We were all in this together, even though we didn't believe the government when it said it. And at that stage, at the very least, the government's message to the UK and the government's message to me was pretty straightforward. Stay away from people, stay home, don't go out unless you absolutely have to. I was extra cautious. My missus in the States was very worried that I would not catch COVID-19 and suffer from it, badly perhaps. I do belong to a family that has had bad chest complaints in the past. So consequently, I'm always very aware of the need to be careful about the business of catching anything which involves, a chest infection of some sort. So, COVID-19 is not something I want to be anywhere close to. So during the initial lockdown of the early part of this year, during March and April, I was very much involved in the business of following the rules, rigidly following the rules. And I've rigidly followed the rules ever since. In fact, I've probably over-followed the rules. Whenever I go out, I always wear gloves, for instance, so that if I'm touching anything, the chances of me actually transmitting what I'm touching back to myself later on is less. And when I come into the house, for instance, the disposable gloves always go off before I get inside to the main part of the house where I live. So I'm disposing of things before they can, before that kind of process can infect anywhere else. And I went through this this elaborate uh, uh, pandemic security process, which I think is very common to everybody. As time went on, though, it became particularly interesting because interesting. Another use of that gross understatement, that it became more worrying as time went on. Um, it became more worrying because as time progressed, the opportunities to work were also curtailed. Governments acted. Our government acted. But it didn't act very much. It created the idea of furlough, and you could be furloughed, but in order to be furloughed, you had to have an employee-based job. That's to say, it didn't have any effect if you happened to be a contractual worker or a freelancer or you were running your own business. People of that ilk, those who had in fact had been encouraged over the decades since the arrival of Thatcher, and I'm one of them, um, suddenly discovered themselves to be out on a limb on their own without any support at all. I was already trying to survive very badly on universal credit, and that is still the case. But the matter has got much worse over the duration of the past year as jobs have become more scarce, as the work has become more uh, transient and here today, gone tomorrow, are in situations where the people who actually run the services which usually employed me in turn have been furloughed themselves. So communicating with them and getting organizational support going has been really difficult for me. The same thing has been happening in the US to my wife. She's suddenly found herself in situations where she's not performing. She's a musician. She loves to perform. It's what she lives for. Not performing as much as she could. She has become much more internalized in the way in which her music works. And her opportunity to sit down and do things like play and record and compose have been much more convenient for her than they were in the past. In some ways, it is the very fact that you can't enact this in real time with other people by going out and performing to audiences in the way you used to on a one-to-one basis, on a face-to-face basis rather, is rather difficult for her. And I deeply, deeply, deeply sympathize with that. I think it's a huge penalty for a musician to end up in situations where virtuality is the only thing that they've got in terms to express themselves. For me, as a teacher, I've had to adapt very, very rapidly to the use of online systems like Zoom and Teams, etc. And I've done it pretty well, probably better than most, because I've got 30 years worth, more than 30 years worth of experience in information technology, and I'm a big tech fan. Everybody knows that. So I've adapted very, very rapidly, and one of the things I've tried desperately hard to do within my work is to provide as much added value to the work I do online as I possibly can. That is to say, if people are going to be paying for courses, they should get the best possible value from me as I can offer. Nevertheless, wages have not gone up, benefits have not gone up. I am suffering badly from that. And in the process of doing that, I've ended up really seriously worried about surviving from month to month. It's got terribly, terribly bad over the past, over the Christmas period before then, and so on and so forth. This is an up and down yo-yo of a financial situation. It's either the money is coming in, or it's not coming in. If it's not coming in, then I'm living on fresh air. And if it is coming in, it's either feast or famine. It's either feast in the sense that it all tends to come in at the same time, or it's coming in trickles here and there. So predictability has gone out the window. And in the background of all this, of course, we're now going through the second COVID spike, as it's often called, at this period of time. We look forward to the business of the a vaccination system getting into gear and a return to something vaguely like normal. But here's the thing: normalcy, as we knew it in early January or December of 2019, 2020, is never going to return. This may seem a very pessimistic prediction, but in fact, it's a natural part of the business of the experience. The last 12 months have seen huge impacts on the ability of individuals to work. So consequently, also the opportunity for individuals to be able to take an active part in society, like myself, who was curtailed by all of that. The second issue, of course, is the business of the impact this has had on mental health. And this has largely been ignored by government. Governments have made, as you might say, nice sounding noises about all that and said, oh dear, how sad, never mind. But the truth of the matter is, what they've forgotten is that the legacy of what has in effect been a curtailment of the social lives of people in the UK has a long-term impact. And that long-term impact, the impact that dare not speak its name, I suppose, at the present time, is that people are suffering badly from conditions such as chronic anxiety, chronic depression, and what can only be called transient post-traumatic stress disorder. The crises and the stress and the pressure of the pandemic and the way in which it has distorted life for people like myself means that the chances are that in the future mental health will not be as predictable as it used to be. This is going to have an impact not just on myself, in the long term. I've suffered from depression. Most people know this. I confess it freely now. I have suffered from depression since I was in my early teens. In the initial stages, it was undiagnosed, and in later stages, I've started to understand how to cope with it. But the extra stress of the anxiety of the COVID virus, hunting in the shadows, as you might say, and the enormous concerns and anxieties of financial collapse has meant that I'm carrying an extra weight that I did not have before. And I think that applies also to my wife. And I'm sure it applies to many of my friends out there and students and people who are watching this and who I've never met before. I deeply sympathize. The message I have got for yourself is that you're not alone. I also am suffering the same way as you do. What I'm also suggesting to people is if you can help someone else, then help them. Because at the end of the day, those of us who are in this situation, are all in it together. We're not all in it together with regard to our financial situation, but those of us who are suffering and know our ethical duty, I suppose, should try to help as much as we can those who are in the worse position than oneself. I try my best by being. I've had some counselling training. Hello, David. I've had some counselling training, and consequently, I've tried my very best to exercise that in public by being a listening ear to people who are suffering from the fears, terrors, anxieties, worries, concerns, and depths of despair that the past year has brought about. So I'm contributing in kind, as you might say, and I would suggest to you all need to contribute in kind, because support is not coming from central government, and I can't see it coming anytime soon. And that the mental health services in the UK were never terribly generous and never terribly easily available to everybody when on demand. And, the crisis is going to produce an awful lot of this. So helping each other has now become a big, big thing. Self-help is now beyond the business of just everybody looking out for themselves. We need some sort of solidarity approach to that. Also, I can't see how we can continue in the future with this mythological idea that human beings are responsible for themselves. What has clearly come to the fore, and I think it's very true in my experience, is that the pandemic has shown how much dependent we are on one another as a society and as individual human beings. We cannot get by without one another. That has become clear. We need the doctors and the nurses. And those doctors and the nurses need the investment of the society, people like me, to be at work, to pay taxes that go towards the support of doctors, nurses, and psychologists, and counselors, and support workers within the community. And that this should not be something that you can only get because you happen to be wealthy, you happen to be rich, that you happen to be privileged in that way. Many of us are not in that position. And that's when I say that though that in the struggle against the aftermath of COVID, we are suffering in many ways on an equal basis. Those who are better off are by far in a more privileged position than people like myself or Roxanne or others who are similar to myself do feel. No, I'm not doing this as a means. This is not Bea Groves' plea for charity. This is not the way this is supposed to be working. I'm trying to be as honest as I possibly can about the situation, and as honest as I possibly can for the sake of people like me who probably want to say something of this sort and don't get the chance to say it. So I'm saying it. I hope this is a message of, maybe it's a shocking message, maybe it is. Maybe this is quite a shocking message to come from me. Maybe it also is a very frank message which shows the picture that we're currently in. The vaccination, the vaccine, the return of the victory of science over the virus is an optimistic thing, and it will help a great deal to enable us to take part in society again. But the experience of a year of this, of solitary confinement, as it has been for many of us, of lack of any social contact, of living in abject poverty, and on trying to deal with it in a way which is ersatz and unsatisfactory, is going to have its consequences. And we need to all be aware of that. And we need to all be supportive of initiatives which will enable us to overcome this as time goes on. But it's going to take time. I would suggest, if you can put pressure on your local authority, put pressure on your local representatives, your MPs, your congressmen, your governors, or whatever it happens to be, anybody who's happened to be listening to this, whether you be American or British or European or whatever, then you should do so. You should do so on the basis of not just the business of the current situation with regard to COVID-19, but also the likely aftermath. We are going to need some proactive and drastic moves to provide support, which are not here at the moment. Otherwise, we are all facing a greater disaster than even the virus has brought about. And with that, sorry, it's not optimistic. And with that small message, I will end here. Thank you for listening. You probably hate everything I've said. But thank you for listening anyway. Get in touch with me. I'm quite happy to talk to people. Take care out there. Stay away from the virus. It's still there. It could still do you harm. And if it's not doing you harm, it could do somebody you know harm through the process of transmission. Even when the vaccine is in place, you still need to be very careful about human contact because of the nature of not everybody being as resistant and not everybody being vaccinated at the same time. It's been said that it won't be until the autumn before we all have got a fair share of vaccinated bodies around in order to combat this. So this is going to be a fair old time before we find ourselves in a safer position that we are now. Please do try to help if you can. Try to help in any way you can with people out there, people you know, people you don't know, people you can support, and so on and so forth. Because by doing that, what you're in fact doing is doing your bit, I suppose, in combating what has been one of the greatest global disasters in recent history. Again, thank you again. Sorry I got off track there yet again. And I shall hopefully have a much happier, much jollier video for you the next time I speak. Bye-bye for now.